New episodes of the I Know You Didn't Ask podcast are out every Monday and Friday, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Welcome to I Know You Didn't Ask. I'm your host, Megan O'Donnell, and today is all about the Devil Wears Prada 1 and 2. I'm so excited to be here today to chat through such an iconic movie franchise, and I'm also really excited to share that I really felt the second film was really funny, topical, irreverent, fashionable, and really fun. I know you would normally expect for me to come in and be a raging bitch and like find a million things to critique about the film, but I'm leaning into being positive today. And of course, it's not a perfect film. Is there such a thing? And, I wasn't going in with too high of any expectations. I was just going in for a good time. And I had a really lovely experience seeing The Devil Wears Prada 2. Speaking of other things that are just great in the media right now, this podcast in general is just really great. The content's been incredibly strong. I've been re-listening to my episodes just as a listener, not as I, edit every episode, because that's like a different type of listening. That's just like listening to get it out into the world. I'm so sick of the episode by the time I'm done editing it. But I've been re-listening to a few of my eps, and I'm just really proud of the work I've been putting out. And as of right now, I have a 3.9 rating on Apple Podcasts, which is just, kind of par for the course. If you know me, I've always been a C plus to B minus kind of student. So I'm not that pressed about it. But if you have a minute, I'd appreciate if you could just go and give me a 5-star rating. You don't even have to type anything. You don't even need to give a proper review. Just a little rating, give me 5 stars, just so that we can get back to being a 4.0. Because I don't know, maybe this is the summer where I start to excel. Maybe this is the summer where everything changes, hopefully for the better. And I think that 4 out of 5 rating really could elevate my show to an upper echelon of podcasting. I am in the 0.5% of top podcasters in the world, which means I am one of 17,500 podcasts that exist that are in the top of the 3.7 million that are out there. I just learned about some of these new pieces of data, and now I'm just going to be like statistician level data blasting you every episode. So, yeah, go rate and review if you can. So I think a lot of fans of the original Devil Wears Prada movie were a little bit trepidatious going into this second film because sequels to iconic films can always take a left turn and become like horrific. And oftentimes viewers feel like the first film was complete. Why do we need a sequel? Why do we need to ruin a good thing? And I think that was one of the many reasons why it took over 18 years to get the ball rolling on the sequel for Devil Wears Prada in general. I was a bit nervous about the sequel. I was 13 when this film came out, and at that time I was already completely obsessed with fashion, the fashion industry, Teen Vogue and Elle and Harper's. Growing up, I had wall-to-wall cutouts of the advertisements and the photo spreads throughout these magazines. I was always a kid who was changing their clothes a million times a day. If I have a new mood, I have a new outfit, and that's honestly still how I live my life to this day. The laundry that I produce in one calendar week is shocking and alarming, and especially alarming because that's not one of my duties in the household. Marriage is really fun because, one person can handle one house task and the other person can handle the other house task. So that is a little bit of a humble brag, and I just, not everything is always roses and daisies, but at least I don't do my own fucking laundry. But anyways, I learned how to express myself through fashion as a kid, and as I became older, I really started learning about fashion history. And for me, I've always found fashion to be a way to storytell. And as I, again, got older, I started taking classes in high school at FIT and LIM, both fashion colleges here in New York City. I grew up on Long Island, so I was able to easily take the train in. Again, taking the train into the city by myself in high school to take classes at FIT. Where were my parents? But I was always mature for my age. So I was really able to learn about how fashion wasn't just about the clothes on your back. It's a way to express who you are through art and, the historical value of pieces and class and gender and even just like rebellion. All of it was really fascinating to me. Seeing a designer like Chanel versus seeing a designer like Betsy Johnson and seeing, okay, both of these people can be in fashion, but they both tell a different story entirely. And I liked feeling like, wow, I can have my Coco Chanel moment with my little pantsuit, or I can be, a badass rebel in like black fingerless gloves and studs on my belt. Like I loved being able to express myself in different ways through the different clothing I was wearing. I think in watching The Devil Wears Prada, I think as a kid, I felt like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to work for a big magazine. In this case, it was Runway Magazine, obviously based on the, very iconic Vogue magazine. And as I got older in my career, that was always kind of like what I wanted to do. I worked at Conde Nast right after college, and I may or may not be working there at this very moment. And I'm being very cagey about this because my big fat mouth has the ability to get me in trouble. I always knew that being in fashion was what I wanted. Obviously, as I got older, I also realized podcasting was a passion of mine as well. But, to pay the bills, I'm a fashion beauty producer. So we're going to be talking a lot about where the future of fashion is heading. And I think The Devil Wears Prada 2 had a really realistic way of portraying the future of the somewhat dismal fashion magazine industry. And so let's go backwards a little bit and talk about how the first film came about in 2006. So The Devil Wears Prada was actually a novel written by Lauren Weissenberger, who was a young woman who was actually a former personal assistant to Anna Wintour. The book came out in 2003. And the rights to the book immediately got scooped up by 20th Century Fox. And then the film itself was out only 3 years later in 2006. And so everybody knows Anna Wintour. She's kind of like a caricature of herself at this point. And she is, somewhat cold and intimidating and specific in particular, demanding, decisive. To be quite honest with you, I kind of admire that type of quality in a boss. I think in a very high pressure world like fashion, you kind of want somebody who's able to make decisions and has a really strong point of view, so you don't spend your afternoon in meetings hemming and hawing over a bunch of bullshit. And I think anybody who's like in corporate America, let alone like fashion, like you could sit in a meeting for an hour and leave and be like, okay, great, we got nothing done, nothing was completed, because the higher ups have no decision making ability. They don't want to hurt somebody, they want to give everybody an opportunity, whatever the bullshit is. So I've always admired that in Anna Wintour. And of course, a boss like Anna Wintour does not believe in work life balance. But I also think you must know that going into a position like this. And we'll, of course, see this with Andy Sachs, the lead character in The Devil Wears Prada, very soon when we get into that. But again, like, this is not a hot take what I'm about to say. But, people talk about Anna Wintour as, this mean bitch. She's so cold. But again, that's like a very gendered way of looking at it. A man who, with those same traits of being disciplined and demanding, somewhat emotionally reserved. I mean, I don't see many men like wearing a pair of like large framed Chanel sunglasses in board meetings. So maybe that's like a particularly gendered way of looking at Anna Wintour. But for somebody who is like clearly like a visionary in fashion, being a woman, a powerful woman, like the language to describe her is more icy and cruel and like a nightmare. And of course, some of the criticism of her and her management style is like completely fair. I think as women, we are oftentimes critiqued in management positions when we're like not simply warm enough, because as a woman, you need to be compliant and lovely and warm and nice and not hurt anybody's feelings or their fragile egos. And I think The Devil Wears Prada original film and obviously the second one kind of show this Miranda Priestly, Anna Wintour character as somebody who's obviously very successful, but that success oftentimes has them lose a bit of their humanity and humility towards the people around them. And again, I think it's a delicate dance. And, male executives leave their families constantly, disregard their families, working constantly, and there isn't the same type of judgment towards them. So anyways, 3 years after the book was published, the 2006 feature film was released. The Devil Wears Prada was directed by David Frankel and produced by Wendy Feinerman. The screenplay was written by Aileen Brosh McKenna. And the movie itself was actually not fully greenlit by 20th Century Fox until Meryl Streep herself was cast as the Miranda Priestly role. Even Anna Wintour in the beginning was a little bit trepidatious about having Meryl Streep play her. She just thought, again, like maybe she was a little bit too warm and gentle and lovely to play such a cunt. It's interesting because Meryl Streep has only used the method acting approach one time, and it was for her role in The Devil Wears Prada. She completely stayed in character between all of her takes, which would be terrifying. Like, as a sweet Anne Hathaway, who was literally 21 years old when she played Andy Sachs, to have to deal with like Meryl Streep in general, like being such an icon. And then like Meryl Streep like being mean to you and like possibly throwing a steak at you, like that would absolutely make me go insane, and I would become, a people pleasing woman like we were just talking about before. Like, how can I make Meryl Streep nice again? Like, what does it take? Because I will do anything so she doesn't yell at me. This iconic role for Meryl Streep also landed her 14th Oscar nomination. She is amazing in this role. Anne Hathaway, again, was like 20, 21 years old when she started filming this feature film. She actually had an internship at a high-end art dealer's office for one whole week, you guys. She worked like a plebeian for one whole week for this role. And I think she really was able to capture the kind of overwhelmed feeling of, being this, assistant to this high profile person. And, she really had the flustered energy, really down pat for this role. So the film itself took 57 days across September to December of 2005 to film. It primarily took place in New York City and, of course, in Paris as well. The film itself grossed over $326 million worldwide against a budget of $35 to $41 million. This was obviously considered a smashing success, both from box office numbers, in addition to just the public loving the film in general. And as we all know, in the first movie, we are meeting Andy Sachs, played by Anne Hathaway. She's an aspiring journalist who recently graduated from Northwestern University. Despite her lack of knowledge of the industry, she was hired as a junior personal assistant to Miranda Priestly. And I think Miranda kind of liked the fact that she wasn't a total fashion girly, and she kind of liked that Andy came in and was like, I'm a real journalist. Like, you need to, respect me for my journalism skills. It's like, honey, you wrote for the college paper. So she starts working at Runway Magazine in New York City, and she's a hater of the whole entire Runway vibe. Uppity, skinny, vapid bitches are all working around her, but she was not one of them. She was a journalist. She's not like the other girls. Slowly but surely with time, Andy actually begins to slowly assimilate into the full Runway Magazine ecosystem. And not only do we see, her putting up with the usual shit from Miranda, she also needs to deal with Miranda's first assistant, Emily, who's played by Emily Blunt. And we also see her kind of having a new friendship and relationship with the art director, Nigel, who's played by Stanley Tucci. Throughout all of her, trials and tribulations, finding the Harry Potter manuscript, and dealing with Miranda's, usual slew of bullshit, getting her a steak, getting the coffee, finding the belts, getting the skirts, and just dealing with the bullshit, she starts to actually find herself doing really well in the role and really excelling. Of course, that comes with some negatives, like her relationship kind of falling flat, her kind of neglecting some of her friendships, lots of other things that we will be getting to. And one of my favorite reoccurring bits throughout the first film is that Miranda refuses to hang up her coat or her purse and just throws them at Andy while she's sitting at her desk. And we'll find that that is a bit of a callback in the second film as well. So Nigel, played by Stanley Tucci again, helps Andy basically get a full glow up because she comes in and she was kind of the magazine's resident ugly duckling. One thing I want to say that was kind of shocking to me as I rewatched the original film just a couple days before seeing the second film, everybody in the film kept calling Anne Hathaway's character fat. And the fat shaming is insane. And it kind of makes me feel terrible for Anne Hathaway, who was obviously in this film and was the star, but also had just been in The Princess Diaries, where she was also just like the ugly duckling. And she's had 2 films with major glow ups. And she's one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life. And to call her fat should be illegal. And again, it's just like another example of, the content that was coming out in the early 2000s that have, reminded everyday normal women that like even the skinniest woman who's a size 4 is actually a fat fuck. To consider Anne Hathaway fat in 2006 is just completely fucking offensive. And she's obviously gorgeous, and we do not fat shame we do sometimes fat shame, but like I don't fat shame Anne Hathaway. Like that's crazy. But while she's with Nigel, he's basically like, honey, we need to give you a top to bottom, tip to taint new look because you're stomping into this office with your Herman Munster shoes, rocking ill-fitting skirts, that horrific blue sweater. And of course, it's not just blue, it's cerulean blue. And she just like looked like a hot mess. The hair was all bad. But Nigel came in and saved her. I will say that cerulean blue sweater is now being sold in a different version at Old Navy. Old Navy did a collaboration with Devil Wears Prada, and they are selling a new version of the cerulean blue sweater. I love that shade of blue, but I wanted to get the sweater, but it had like a little emblem of like a high heel where like, a logo would be like the, horse for Ralph Lauren. And I don't do, branding like that. Sorry. But definitely go take a look at Old Navy's collab if you're interested in some of their pieces. Lots of like, graphic tees with like "that's all" written on them, which I don't exactly need right now. The humor in the first film was definitely a little bit edgier. They're very much like picking on her, calling her a six, asked her if she got her skirt at the ugly skirt convention. And what I liked about this film, the first one, was like they were kind of mean and cheeky. Like, I don't know, I guess now we live in such a world where like everybody needs to be nice at all time. There is no sass, or else you will get reported to fucking HR. But I liked that Emily would make a fucked up mean joke to Annie and she'd giggle. Stanley Tucci had a little twinkle in his eye when he would say something mean. Same with Miranda. There was a bit of an underlying humor throughout the film that was fun and it made it feel real, where I think a lot of directors and writers now are scared of having characters like be a little cunty because they're like, I don't want everybody to be mad at me, God forbid. But to go back to Andy's main outfits, iconic celebrity stylist Patricia Fields was the film's costume designer and stylist, and she's been the main stylist for so many of the biggest fashion-forward films or TV shows ever made: Sex and the City, Emily in Paris, Ugly Betty, and she was even nominated for the best costumes at the Academy Awards for this film. What I found really interesting as a producer was that her entire budget for the 57 days they shot was only $100,000 for costumes, which is literally nothing in terms of a production's costume budget working at the level that they were working at. But of course, Patricia Fields was able to supplement some of the costumes that they had to pay for or rent through just her industry contacts. She was able to basically get millions of dollars of clothing for free that was ultimately appearing on screen. I'm going to guess Patricia Fields was like, that's going to be good enough. All of the designers out there are going to want their pieces in this film because they know, it's going to be a really high end level styled look that all of the characters are going to be in. And one way that they actually saved money on set was that Emily and Meryl and Anne Hathaway would wear full outfits when they needed to, but if their feet weren't showing, they would always be wearing like Uggs or casual shoes. There were some pieces from the original Devil Wears Prada film that absolutely shaped my life. First and foremost, the long pearl Chanel necklaces had me in a chokehold. I obviously couldn't afford like a $3,000 to $4,000 piece of costume jewelry from Chanel, but I was going to Canal Street and I was finding a long layered Chanel necklace with the pearls. Oh my god, so cold. Then of course Miranda had like the big Chanel sunnies, and that inspired me for, again, exclusively knockoffs because I was a child. But I do think I want to go back to like a large square framed sunglass moment with the two huge C's on the side. I'm usually not one for wearing aggressive designer pieces, but I feel like it's in the cultural zeitgeist to get back into Devil Wears Prada themed looks. So I'm going to start looking into that. Thankfully, I'm gainfully employed at this point, so I don't need to go to Canal Street, but it's a piece of fucking plastic. What's the difference if they're real or fake? Emily also wore an Hermes cuff, like the large leather cuff with all of the studs going around it. Also had me completely gagged. If Chanel was out of my reach when I was 13, Hermes was completely out of my reach. And God knows I was calling it Hermes at that time. And also, every time I see The Devil Wears Prada original film, it makes me want to get bangs. When Andy Sachs came out in her head to toe Chanel look, the newsboy cap, and those motherfucking bangs, I almost dropped dead. I almost had to call my stylist at the Lemon Tree, which was a budget hair salon out on Long Island. I had to almost call her and say, ma'am, start sharpening your shears because your girl is getting bangs. And I will never get bangs. I've moved on from that point in my life. But Andy Sachs's bangs changed the trajectory of girls' hairstyles for many, many years after the original film was released. Of course, in the first film, we see the personal lives of both Andy and Miranda kind of flounder. While Andy and Miranda are in Paris, Miranda opens up that her husband's filed for divorce. And Andy's relationship with Adrienne Grenier in the film also ultimately didn't end up working out because unfortunately she was choosing work over her relationship. And Adrienne Grenier's character in this film kind of was portrayed as the villain. He was very much happy for her when she originally got the job, but then quickly started changing his tune when she was like, I need to prioritize work. And when Miranda calls me, I have to drop everything. And he was saying, fashion's pointless. All the girls you work with are just like anorexic bitches. Like, they had to end things as she was obviously prioritizing her work with Miranda and Runway over their relationship. And I think over time, you kind of begin to see the parallels between Andy and Miranda and how sometimes when you give your entire life to your job, the relationships around you begin to suffer. And I will just put on the record that Adrienne Grenier will forever be one of the sexiest men in history. That curly brown hair, those green motherfucking eyes. Oh my god. I feel like Adrienne Grenier is like one of those guys who's kind of like Kevin Bacon, where like everybody has like somebody in their life that they know who's had a story with Adrienne Grenier. Like every girl I know basically is like, oh, I met him. Oh, I dated him. Oh, I fucked him. Oh, he bought me a drink. Oh, I met him at a club. Oh my god, he was so funny in the line at the bathroom. Like everybody I know has had a moment with Adrienne Grenier. I did see him once at JFK Airport. He was at a like Massage Envy or like a place to get a massage. I do believe he was buying a neck pillow. So we love an ergonomic king. But I also had a friend who said she went out with him, but she was kind of a liar. So like I don't know if I believe her, but she was pretty and I could actually see it happening for her. But ultimately he had to go. We had to kick him to the curb. If you don't support my fucking job and my new career, then you're donezo. And we will see that she had a bit of a fling with a guy in Paris. And I mean, when she said, I'm not your baby. I was like saying that to myself in my mirror growing up. I'm like, I'm not your baby. I'm like talking to like my stuffed animals. No one was my baby. I'm 13. I'm only dating gay guys at that time. Like I was nobody's baby, unfortunately. So as Andy is working for Runway, we do see her commitment to the job obviously increase, and she begins to honestly outperform Emily, who was the first assistant who was dying to go to Paris Fashion Week with Miranda. And this is kind of the first moment where we see Andy starting to turn into Miranda more than maybe she would have ever expected. And then there's obviously the drama between Nigel, where he kind of tells Andy that he's accepted this role as a creative director for this new brand. And then ultimately, it seems like Miranda kind of screws him out of that job to protect herself. And then Andy ends up confronting Miranda and asks her, how she could have done this to Nigel. And Miranda's basically like, honey, you compromise your own values when you sidelined Emily for this trip to Paris. So let's call a spade a spade. You did exactly what I did. And sometimes you have to look out for yourself in business. And ultimately at that point, Andy decides, I don't recognize myself anymore. Like, what have I become? Who is this person that I've become now? And, ultimately she ends up leaving Runway, yada, yada. And I think Andy just like girl bossed a little too close to the sun. She was like, how am I screwing over my friend and my colleague over my own pursuits? And I'm no longer a journalist and all I care about is like, fancy parties and like fitting into Chanel suits. And, she chose work over her husband. And she honestly kind of saw Miranda's life and was like, I don't want that. I don't want all of those same things. And even though Miranda's life is full of beautiful things, whether it's her job, full of gorgeous photo shoots and beautiful bags and the art pieces that she's working with and these photographers and amazing things and her gorgeous home and her beautiful daughters. Like, she's still ultimately at the end of the day, like, by herself and alone, you know, brutally critiqued by the media for everything she does, is also, just like a huge bitch, and everybody knows it. So 20 years later is where The Devil Wears Prada 2 picks up. And the film itself began development in July of 2024 with the four leading characters, Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci, all signing on to reprise their roles, as well as the director, the writer, and the set designer all came back as well. So there was a really nice continuity amongst the creative people behind the scenes, as well as, all of the familiar faces from the original movie coming into the second film as well. So many people asked, why did it take so long to make The Devil Wears Prada 2? And I think it's because nostalgia for such an amazing film really creates impossible standards for a sequel. People go into a sequel hoping that they can kind of recreate that first experience and the magic of that film that they loved. And not only like the nostalgia factor, but we're dealing with the A-list top of the top stars in Hollywood. So for all four of their schedules to align, it is a miracle in itself. And the principal photography of this film took place from June to October of 2025 throughout Manhattan, Milan, and also filming here in New Jersey. What's good, New Jersey? Tax credits for all film and productions, if you didn't know. But the turnaround time from about 1 year of development to shooting to then releasing was very quick and very impressive. It literally stopped filming this October of 2025 and was released May 1st. And I will say, I think a lot of that comes with everything being shot practically. We're not dealing with AI, fucking CGI slop that takes so long in post-production. They shot everything practically. Of course, there's probably moments where they use CGI and whatnot, but most of it was shot practically, which means there's only so much footage you have. There's only so much cutting that you could really do in the edit bay. But the film itself received generally positive reviews from critics and has grossed $546 million against a $100 million production budget. So in comparison to the first film, it grossed about $200,000 more worldwide and had a little bit more than double the production budget. And we can't forget, there is inflation, especially in labor fees, production fees, and people say, oh, the tariffs. Like, tariffs affect like every industry around you. When China is having restrictive tariffs and China is the place that makes the cartridges for the cameras that we're using, that just increases production budget. So the fact that this film was, still $100 million, but made $546 million, was a huge financial success for 20th Century Studios. It made $200 million more than the first film. And so much of that was because of the fucking marketing machine behind The Devil Wears Prada 2. If you have Instagram or social media or anything, you saw one of the many marketing campaigns that were around The Devil Wears Prada 2. Whether it was with Dior, Google, Coca-Cola, Samsung, Grey Goose, Mercedes-Benz, L'Oreal, Zillow, Tresemme, United Airlines, so many companies decided to do some type of collaboration for the marketing of this film. The campaign's promotional value was over $250 million. And it's fucking crazy that the film itself cost $100 million, yet the marketing campaigns for the film was over $250 million. It's effing crazy. And, and in these days, making a great film is like half the battle. If nobody knows the film exists, nobody's buying a ticket and nobody's going to AMC and nobody's sitting their ass in a seat and eating popcorn. Studios are honestly realizing that the marketing of the film itself is possibly like more important than the film itself, because ultimately at the end of the day, they need people to go see this to justify spending the $100 million it took to make the film in general. And there was a ton of buzz around this movie that was completely organic as well. Paparazzi and everyday people were catching the A-list celebrities in this film, shooting on the streets of New York City. We're posting photos, posting videos of, seeing them shoot in real time, which obviously gets the people going. It gets the buzz and the word across that this amazing new film is going to be coming out. And the film's first trailer was released on February 1st with a record 222 million views within the first 24 hours. And 20th Century described it as the most viewed trailer in the studio's history. So clearly, people were obsessed, people were excited. And I don't know about you, but if you're a real true fan of I Know You Didn't Ask, you would have heard us discussing the trailer on a February 2026 episode. So keep your ears peeled, people. I'm on the pulse. Don't you fucking forget it. So, as I mentioned, they maintain the same director, writer, and set designer for this film. They did get a new stylist. They ended up going with Molly Rogers, who did step into the role and worked alongside her mentor, Patricia Fields, as well, who was from the original film. Law Roach, who's a celebrity stylist as well, did make a little bit of a cameo in the film. Would have loved to have Law Roach also get involved in the styling, but of course, he can't do everything. I believe he retired from styling and then came back to styling. People should just not publicly retire because they always come back. They always come back for money. I mean, I'll literally do anything for money at this point. So for The Devil Wears Prada 2, Anne Hathaway, Meryl Streep, and Emily Blunt all agreed to have a $12.5 million upfront payment equally, plus back ends depending on the film's performance. Each of them can ultimately net about $20 million for this performance. And I am sorry, but I am not generally one to stand up for a white straight man in terms of, getting paid properly. But I do believe Stanley Tucci should have been paid $12.5 million with Meryl, with Anne, and with Emily. The movie wouldn't be the same without him. I'm sorry. It's rare that I'm standing up for the white man, but today I stand up for Tucci, my fellow Italian brethren. So the second film is obviously a movie that is technically about fashion, but it honestly feels like it's really nailing the kind of sad and bleak reality of the modern journalism world, especially in the fashion world. And I liked that the movie itself was rooted in realism in that way. It wasn't fluffy in a sense that it's pretending like the magazine industry dying in front of our very eyes. And so we'll go into a little bit about the plot here, but we're not going to go too deep because I don't want to give spoilers, and I do want to encourage everybody to see it in the theaters. When I went to the theaters to see The Devil Wears Prada 2, I very much stepped into my power where I decided I no longer share popcorn. I don't want to share the bag. I don't want to be looking over to see if I can have some if you're holding the bag. I am done with that. I am an adult. I have an income and I'm not sharing my popcorn. And honestly, it felt really good to start this new path in my life where I no longer share popcorn at such an iconic film. But we want to keep theaters alive. And if you have an independent theater, keep them alive. I live in New Jersey, Montclair, New Jersey to be exact. And the Claridge Theater is just fucking 10 out of 10. Awesome. Independent theater playing all of the major films that are out right now. And it really feels good to support local businesses. Anyways, so Devil Wears Prada 2 basically picks up 20 years after Andy has escaped the chaos of Runway magazine. Miranda Priestly still there, still a see you next Tuesday. And Andy's now a legit journalist, having worked in New York. She was successful, respected, and is really living out the career that she had always wanted. And all of a sudden, the newsroom and the newspaper she had been working at for many, many years ultimately went under. And naturally, in the age that we're living in, her and all of her colleagues were laid off via text message. And I think this brings up a larger conversation that the movie does tackle very well. They talk about how media consolidation and the changing of corporate ownership for many different iconic news sources is seemingly happening more and more year over year. And we see it in Hollywood, and now we see it in media. And it's always been a thing in media, but lately it's become more apparent as it just becomes more expensive to produce high quality content. And that's just the fact. And, I worked at Conde Nast for years, and then I went to New York Media, which owned New York Magazine, The Cut, Curbed, Grub Street, and Vulture. After about 9 months of working there, we got bought out and honestly ultimately saved because of the pandemic would have probably shut down New York media. So Vox Media ended up snatching up New York media, who then owned Vox Media, The Verge, Eater, and many other sites. And then 2 years after that, we merged with Group 9, which owned Thrillist, now this, Pop Sugar. And so I saw firsthand how these mergers and acquisitions would completely shake up teams. You'd be scared for your job. You'd see sweeping layoffs on your teams. But you would also see how hiring and firing upper management or these people who have worked at these companies for a very long time and helped build that brand's voice would now be kicked to the curb, and a new person from another publication who really doesn't understand the voice or the perspective of the magazine that they're now working for, and now they just have to like start working there. And no offense, but a writer for New York Magazine should not be crossing over with a writer from Pop Sugar. No offense, but like they're just apples and oranges in terms of brand identity, brand voice, and lasting power in the media. Something I read from New York Magazine is oftentimes like very thought-provoking and well thought out. And like, again, no offense, Pop Sugar, but when I'm like reading a Pop Sugar article about like the best, face ice roller, like I'm not retaining it in the same way as something from New York Magazine. And again, maybe I'm biased, but you definitely see media consolidation changing the tone of many different publications year over year. And so throughout the film, there's obviously this tension between this old school editorial culture that we saw from the original film and the new modern digital era. And so much so that Runway Magazine is now fully digital only, which is obviously common in many media companies and across many iconic magazines. Glamour Magazine is no longer a physical magazine. Allure. So many companies are now moving to a digital-only model because they're saving so much money by not even attempting to put out physical copies of magazines. And it's just like the end of an era. And I think it's better for these companies to make that switch to digital now versus hemorrhaging out more money to, produce these magazines that are just like simply not selling. People aren't buying magazines in person. And when you do pick up a magazine in person, it is 0.1 ounce, so tiny, and it's just full of advertisements. Like even like the content within them, it might not be as strong as it would have been many moons ago. I will say, I am a magazine whore. Food and Wine, New York Magazine. I will always support them. I do read a Vogue here and there. I've always been a Harper's Bazaar girly. The amount of times I've applied for jobs at Harper's Bazaar and not gotten them is a problem that lives deep down within me, and something I'll probably be talking about when I'm half dead, like in the hospital at 93. But I've always loved Harper's. But I'm a magazine girly, so I continue to support magazines and independent journalism. Miranda is still kind of representing this old world, prestige-driven approach to publishing, while, the corporate side of the company is really looking for trends. They're reading into algorithms. They care more about profits and views and these advertising partners. And of course, the rise of AI is very much a problem within the current landscape that we're in. And a lot of these legacy publications are still existing to this day and possibly paying my rent. But, we're seeing, the business strategy for these brands changing, really moving away from journalism and editorial content and really finding that they need to lean into business strategy and long-term advertising partners to really keep these companies afloat. And so we see consolidation concerns throughout the entire film. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into it, but the owner of Elias Clark, the independent owner of, the company that owns Runway, is possibly wanting to sell Runway entirely, and his son is actually now taking over the company, and he's played by BJ Novak, who's like a classic rich nepo baby douchebag, doesn't respect Miranda and what she does for the magazine and for the fashion world. Like, he doesn't see it as art, he just sees it as like dollar signs in his eyes. And he's finding it more of an investment versus like a piece of art that like helps preserve the moment and the culture that we're in. And he's like just a classic bro. Like, he's always like punching Miranda on her shoulder, like never like giving her proper respect or like treating her like the icon that she is. And so we see him in the film, it's kind of like the antagonist to Miranda Priestly, where she's like, oh, okay, like I kind of grew up in the industry with your father, and now I'm seeing that you, this young buck, is now going to be taking over. Like, she's starting to have those feelings about, like, is it time for me to step aside and to retire and to hang up my hat and just move on with my life and be done with Runway for good. So ultimately, Andy ends up getting hired to be back at Runway to work as a features editor. And Miranda may or may not have known she was going to be coming back, and that's a whole other drama. But we end up kind of seeing the gang get back together. Nigel, Stanley Tucci's character, is still a senior level art director there, keeping his fucking foot on the necks of these basic junior writers, creatives. And we also see Emily, who is now working at Dior. She obviously left Runway. And Dior is actually one of the major advertising partners with Runway. So we kind of see this newfound power that Emily has over Miranda and the future of Runway, because these advertising partners really do have a huge say in a brand's success. If you can't advertise your product, then who's going to pay the product's bills, realistically? And it does seem like Emily was really smelling the blood in the water at Runway and was really starting to find ways to leverage their vulnerability by promoting Dior more. And one of the main plot points is that Emily is now dating actually tech billionaire Benji Barnes, who is seemingly wanting to buy Elias Clark from the current owners. Benji Barnes was played by Justin Theroux, and he's like a doofy, silly, dumb billionaire. And like, also, daddy was looking thick. Justin Theroux putting on a few pounds was kind of hot. Like, I was kind of into it. Like, he was also like kind of balding in the film. I don't know what was happening there, but he basically plays a billionaire tech bro type. If it might remind you of anybody whose name sounds like Shmemos, but he's kind of playing this billionaire who kind of wants to come in and buy this company, has no former knowledge of fashion or publishing or anything like that. But we've been seeing in real time that many more billionaires are trying to get into, you know, the culture by buying their way in. And I think we saw Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez's involvement in this year's Met Gala very much showed the public that, you know, these people are the only people who can kind of like afford to save these brands, and whether we like it or not, they might be moving in and swooping in to buy some of these cultural institutions like Vogue in particular. But the problem is that Bezos and Sanchez like aren't donating to the Met Gala because they like love costuming and they love preserving the history of our world through fashion. Like, they care about being on red carpets and kikiing with Anna Wintour front row at the fashion shows. You know, they don't give a fuck about the cultural touchstones of an event like the Met Gala and the Costume Institute at the Met Museum. They just want to get their grubby hands on invitations to events with like elite people. They really position Justin Theroux's character in the second film as, you know, like a big billionaire dummy who's like just buying Runway to make Emily happy. And like, again, we don't need another white billionaire who doesn't know the difference between like a Tom Ford Gucci dress and a Galliano Dior dress. We don't need somebody who has like no genuine passion for fashion, a passion for fashion, but like, we want people to like ultimately buy these companies who have some type of like editorial standards, or is at least willing to keep the people who do value these things at the top of their companies. And so even throughout this whole film, you know, this Justin Theroux's character is having conversations with Miranda about artificial intelligence replacing jobs. And Miranda's like, no, that's not going to happen. And he's like, honey, it absolutely will happen. What are you talking about? Half the shit I read these days on the internet has been written by artificial intelligence, and it's just, again, the way of the future, whether we like it or not. So it's just really fascinating to see where the future of Runway will go. Again, I'm not giving you guys spoilers because I want you to go see the film. I really do. But relationship wise, you know, we see Miranda has a new man who seems really supportive and stable. Andy was obviously not with Adrienne Grenier's character from the first film. She comes into the second film single as a Pringle, and she does find a new love interest, which is exciting, but of course she tries to push him away. But no, they're brought back together through love. Just fucking inspiring. One of the things I really loved about this movie was that there was this underlying plot line throughout the entire film that actually felt very meta. I don't want to spoil it, but I think it's interesting ethical dilemma that we see Andy facing throughout the entire film. Again, that was like rooted in the situation that actually led us to having the first book about Anna Wintour from 2003, in our lives. So just go and see it. I really, really liked it. The second film had a few callbacks that did not feel too forced or heavy-handed that, called back to the first film. When Miranda first saw that Andy was in her office, Andy thought she was like going to come in and be like hugged and like embraced with open arms, but Miranda like may or may not have remembered her. And Anne Hathaway was like, "Remember me, the fat assistant you used to have? Like, bitch, you're not fat. You are not fat. I repeat, you are not fat." But Tucci continues to call her a 6 because that's her looks rating, which, like, if she's a 6, I'm a fucking 2. And you'd think that an episode about fashion in the industry would, like, encourage me to, like, look cuter on today's episode, available on Spotify and YouTube if you want to watch on video, which, like, maybe I shouldn't tell you 52 minutes into the show, but I probably should have, like, gotten a little cuter for this one, but whatever. I'm just truly doing the best I can. But Tucci calling her a 6 was, again, a callback and brutal. But, there was, of course, like, still Miranda-isms coming through, the insults, the rude comments. But again, like, that doesn't really fly in today's society. So we're seeing her new assistant, played by Simone Ashley, who's just, like, fucking gorgeous, really being able to kind of, like, patrol Miranda and the shit that she was saying throughout meetings and whatnot. Miranda now has to unfortunately hang up her own coat and bag, which is a really funny moment that we kind of see, which again is a callback to Miranda just like throwing her shit at Andy upon arrival to the office. But watching Miranda kind of struggle to hang up her own coat and bag really kind of showed her being like knocked down a peg from like being at the height of like her career where she could like do whatever she wants with her assistants versus like now, where now she like needs to like respect her employees, as well as just like showing her age. We see, Starbucks in Miranda's hands at all times. And in this day and age, I'm shocked we weren't supporting local, but whatever. She's a corporate girl through and through. We did not have any that's all moments in the second film. She was doing more of like a grunt, which I really liked because over time she's like, I don't even have the ability to waste 2 seconds by saying 2 words, that's all. She just says, like, I'm good. And, the icy glares were, of course, there. The cerulean blue sweater did make a comeback in a vest form, but, we had to do a little callback to the infamous sweater. And, again, I really liked the film, but there were some critiques that people made about the film in general. And I think from a technical standpoint, I found the lighting to be a little bit different. And people were saying that it kind of had that Netflix look, which had a bit of a lack of contrast in the colors throughout. And it kind of felt a little smooth and flat. And again, coming from a production standpoint, lighting costs a lot of money. Nowadays, inflation, again, like I mentioned, has just changed the reality of production budgets. So on a scene that might have taken 2 days to shoot in the past will now be like shot in a half day because of all of the new expenses that come with it. So finding time to really hone in on perfect lighting for every single shot is just like not financially feasible. And that seemed to be a large critique throughout the entire film. And I also found that in the first film, there was an incredibly dramatic sound design. The soundtracks themselves really kind of were like a time capsule for the early 2000s. And also like just like the overall sound effects that were happening, whether she was running through the streets to go to Smith and Walensky's to get the steak, the music was like really amped up and super dramatic. And, sound design not only captures the viewer's attention, but it can really help with pacing to keep things dynamic. And, a more elevated, fast-paced song really gets your heart pumping a little bit. And you actually are like, oh my God, well, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And I really felt like the sound design just was not at the same level as the first one as well. I really thought it was a really fun film. I thought, anybody who loves the original one will definitely enjoy this one. And I didn't want to give too many spoilers today, but I really encourage you to go and take your friend, take your mom, take your daughter, take your gay son too. He will absolutely fucking love it. But thank you so much for listening to I Know You Didn't Ask. I hope you guys enjoyed this fun little Devil Wears Prada episode. I don't know. I felt like it was fun to do. Like, I just wanted to like celebrate a movie that really, really, really inspired me to pursue a world of publishing and media. And obviously I, again, may or may not be working at the actual runway magazine at the moment. Again, quiet, Megan. So maybe that's why I didn't talk about the Met Gala this year. I don't know, but being able to see this film come out while I'm working there at this time is also kind of meta and really cool and really exciting, and honestly, like, makes me kind of proud of myself. Sometimes I think, like, on my worst days, I'm like, oh God, I hate my job. I hate my life. Then I'm like, wait, like, this is the job I asked for. This is the life I asked for. And I have to take a step back and say, I'm grateful because it's pretty fucking cool. But anyways, thank you for listening to this episode. We have a pop culture breakdown coming later this week. You guys, Pete Davidson is a deadbeat dad. Who would have fucking thought that would be the case? Who would have thought he would betray his girlfriend of 3 months? Fucking idiot. We'll be digging into that and all the latest going on in pop culture later this week. So be sure to subscribe, tune in, and please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. I'm not kidding. I kind of need it. I really want to be 4 out of 5, you guys. Please. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of your week. Bye. New episodes of the I Know You Didn't Ask podcast are out every Monday and Friday, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.